The noonday sun beat down on Harmony Gulch, a relentless hammer on an unforgiving anvil. Dust devils danced in the parched main street, mirroring the unease swirling through the gathered crowd. Eleanor Vance, her wrists bound, stood on a makeshift auction block, the rough wood digging into her bare feet. Her dress, once a modest blue, was now caked with grime and torn at the hem. Before her, a grizzled sheriff, his face etched with the harsh realities of frontier justice, read a decree that sealed her fate, convicted of horse theft, a capital crime in these parts. Her eyes, a striking blue against her pale, dirt-streaked face, scanned the faces in the crowd, a desperate plea for a kindness she knew wouldn't come. Whispers, like the buzz of agitated flies, followed her. Thief, outlaw, deserves what's coming. Despair coiled in her gut, a venomous snake tightening its grip. She was a stranger in this land, accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit, caught in a web of misunderstanding and prejudice. The memory of the stolen stallion, a blur of muscle and speed, haunted her. She had simply found it riderless and tried to help, but in the unforgiving West, intentions rarely mattered as much as appearances. The auctioneer, a corpulent man with a booming voice, began his morbid chant, selling off her meager possessions to cover her perceived debt to the community. Her small, leather-bound journal, a gift from her late mother, was snatched up by a woman with a sneer. A surge of impotent fury, hot and sharp, pierced through Eleanor's fear. This wasn't justice. It was a spectacle, a warning to any who dared to step out of line. The shadow of the gallows, stark and menacing, stretched long across the dusty ground, a grim countdown to her demise. Every breath tasted of dust and dread. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked, but she would not break. Not yet. She clung to a sliver of hope, a desperate prayer in the parched landscape of her soul. If you're gripped by Eleanor's fight for survival, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next thrilling chapters. Just as the auctioneer's gavel was poised to strike, signaling the sale of her final possession and the inevitable march to the gallows, a deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Hold on!" All eyes turned to a man on horseback, silhouetted against the blinding sun. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the lean, hardened look of a man who spent his days under the vast western sky. His face was weathered, his eyes a piercing green that seemed to see right through her. He wore a dusty Stetson, a worn leather vest, and carried the unmistakable aura of a man of substance. This was Elias Thorne, a reclusive rancher who owned the largest spread in the county, known for his stern demeanor and unwavering sense of justice. A hush fell over Harmony Gulch. Elias dismounted, his spurs jingling softly, and walked deliberately towards the auction block. The crowd parted for him, a mixture of respect and apprehension on their faces. Eleanor held her breath, a fragile flutter in her chest. Was this a reprieve, or merely another twist in her cruel fate? Elias stopped before her, his gaze unwavering. "What's the charge, Sheriff?" he asked, his voice low but authoritative. The sheriff, visibly uneasy under Thorne's scrutiny, repeated the accusation of horse theft. Eleanor, finding a surge of unexpected courage, blurted out, "I found the horse, sir. It was riderless. I was trying to return it." Elias Thorne's eyes narrowed, taking in her desperate plea, the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of defiance. He had heard whispers of the incident, how the horse in question, a prized stallion belonging to the notorious O'Malley gang, had gone missing, and how Eleanor, a newcomer, had been quickly scapegoated. He knew the O'Malleys were a brutal lot, and their accusations often held more weight than truth. He looked from Eleanor to the sheriff, then to the silent, watchful crowd. A decision formed in his mind, a risky gamble, but one driven by a sense of fundamental fairness that few in Harmony Gulch possessed. Elias Thorne's gaze swept over the townsfolk, then back to Eleanor. He saw not just a convicted thief, but a young woman cornered, desperate. He knew the O'Malleys had a reputation for framing innocents to deflect from their own nefarious dealings. "Sheriff," Elias said, his voice firm, "I'll pay the damages for the horse and a fine for the inconvenience. But this woman won't hang." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The sheriff, initially stunned, then stammered, "Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, the law is the law." "And the law also allows for restitution," Elias retorted, pulling a pouch from his belt and letting the heavy clink of coins echo in the silence. "Enough to replace 10 horses, if need be. And I'll take her on at my ranch. Supervise her. If she steps out of line, I'll personally bring her back to you." A stunned silence enveloped the square. Elias Thorne was not a man to be trifled with, and his word carried significant weight. The sheriff, caught between the rigid demands of the law and the formidable presence of Elias, hesitated. Eleanor, heart-pounding, watched the exchange, a fragile hope blossoming within her. The noose, though unseen, still felt tightly around her neck. She had nothing to offer in return, no family, no land, only her life. In a moment of raw desperation, her voice, though hoarse, carried clearly through the hushed square. "If you save me, sir," she cried, looking directly at Elias, "I swear I'll be your wife. I'll work your ranch, keep your home, whatever you ask, for as long as you live." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Elias Thorne, a man who had notoriously avoided marriage, whose ranch hands swore he was wedded only to the land, turned sharply, his green eyes widening slightly. The offer was audacious, born of pure survival instinct. He studied her face again, searching for deceit, but found only a desperate sincerity. He considered the implications, the whispers, the change to his solitary life. He had wanted to save her from an unjust fate, but this was an unexpected turn. He saw the flicker of defiance again, a spirit that refused to be completely broken. Elias Thorne's decision was swift, born not of affection, but of a pragmatic belief in second chances, and perhaps a touch of unexpected intrigue. He looked at Eleanor, then back at the sheriff, who stood, bewildered, before the rancher's unyielding resolve. "Consider it done, then," Elias stated, his voice final. He paid the hefty sum, the coins glinting in the harsh sunlight, a stark contrast to the rough justice that had almost claimed Eleanor. The sheriff, seeing no other option, nodded grudgingly, the weight of public opinion and Thorne's influence too great to defy. Eleanor felt the invisible bonds of the noose loosen. She was free, but at what cost? She was now bound by a vow spoken in desperation, a promise to a man she barely knew, a stranger who had stepped from the shadows to become her unlikely savior. Elias unchained her himself, his touch surprisingly gentle as he removed the cold metal from her wrists. The marks were raw and red, a stark reminder of how close she had come to death. He then simply gestured for her to follow him, his expression unreadable. The ride to Thorne's ranch was silent, the vast, empty expanse of the plains stretching out around them, broken only by distant mesas and the occasional scrub brush. Eleanor rode behind him, the rhythmic creak of the saddle a constant companion. She felt a mix of relief, trepidation, and a strange sense of unreality. Her life had been irrevocably altered in a single desperate moment. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was sprawling, a cluster of sturdy log buildings nestled against a rise, surrounded by corrals filled with cattle. It was a place of hard work and solitude, echoing the man who owned it. Elias showed her to a small, humble cabin set apart from the main house. "This will be your quarters," he said, his voice gruff, yet not unkind. "There's work to be done. We'll speak of other matters later." He left her there, a sudden quiet descending as the dust settled around the cabin. Eleanor stepped inside. It was sparsely furnished but clean. She ran her hand over a rough-hewn table, then looked out the small window at the setting sun, painting the sky in fiery hues. Her new life, whatever it entailed, had begun. If you're captivated by Eleanor's journey and want to see how this extraordinary pact unfolds, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more. The first few days at the Thorne Ranch were a blur of hard work and quiet observation. Eleanor found herself mending clothes, cooking for the small crew of ranch hands, and tending to the modest garden. Elias Thorne was a man of few words, but his presence was constant and commanding. He watched her, she knew, not with suspicion, but with a quiet assessment, as if trying to gauge the depth of her resolve. The ranch hands, a gruff but generally decent lot, treated her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect, a stark contrast to the judgment of Harmony Gulch. The silence between Eleanor and Elias was often heavy, punctuated only by the sounds of ranch life, the lowing of cattle, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant crack of a whip. Eleanor often caught herself wondering about the man who had saved her, this solitary rancher who had no need for a wife, yet had accepted her desperate offer. Was he a man of honor, or did he have his own motives? She knew she had made a promise under duress, but a promise in the Old West carried the weight of a blood oath. One evening, after the last of the supper dishes were put away, Elias finally broke the silence that had stretched between them like a taut rope. He found her sitting on the porch of her cabin, watching the stars blaze across the ink-black sky. "Eleanor," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She flinched slightly, surprised by his approach. He sat beside her, the wood groaning under his weight. "That vow you made," he began, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It was made under duress. I won't hold you to it if you wish otherwise." Eleanor turned to him, her heart thumping. The unexpected offer of freedom, of a choice, was almost overwhelming. For a moment she considered it. But where would she go? What would she do? She had nothing. No family, no prospects. And Elias Thorne had saved her life. She looked into his eyes, seeing a weariness there, a solitude that mirrored her own. "A vow is a vow, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You saved me. I will honor my word." The words hung in the night air, sealing their strange, improbable destiny. With Eleanor's reaffirmation of her vow, a subtle shift occurred on the Thorne Ranch. The unspoken tension between them lessened, replaced by a cautious understanding. Elias, though still reserved, began to confide in Eleanor about the ranch, the challenges of the land, the unpredictable nature of the cattle market. He saw her keen intelligence, her quiet resilience, and a surprising strength that belied her gentle demeanor. Eleanor, in turn, learned about the intricacies of ranching life, the daily rhythms dictated by the sun and the needs of the herd. She learned to mend saddles, track stray cattle, and even helped birth a calf, her hands surprisingly adept. Their conversations grew longer, stretching into the quiet evenings. They spoke of their pasts, carefully at first, then with increasing openness. Eleanor shared snippets of her life back east, a life of hardship and loss that had led her west in search of a new beginning. Elias spoke of his own struggles, the dreams he had for his ranch, the loneliness that had settled in after a tragedy years ago. He had lost his family to a fever, leaving him isolated and hardened. Eleanor realized he wasn't just a stern rancher. He was a man who had carried a great weight of sorrow. One particularly hot afternoon, a sudden violent dust storm swept across the plains, engulfing the ranch in a choking, blinding cloud. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the cabin and whipping dust into every crevice. Eleanor, caught outside, struggled to make her way back, terrified and disoriented. Elias, seeing her plight, battled the gale to reach her, pulling her close, sheltering her with his own body until they could make it indoors. In that moment of shared vulnerability, pressed close against his solid frame, Eleanor felt a tremor of something new, something beyond obligation, a fragile thread of connection. When the storm finally passed, leaving a thick layer of reddish dust over everything, the world felt cleansed, yet strangely altered. The air was still, the sky a muted grey. Elias released her, their eyes meeting in the dim light of the cabin. There was no need for words. The shared experience, the unspoken protection, had forged a bond, an unspoken promise that went deeper than the desperate vow made at the auction block. Their relationship was no longer just a transaction. It was slowly, tentatively, beginning to evolve. The fragile peace at Thorne Ranch was soon threatened by the outside world. News of Elias Thorne's unconventional marriage to a woman saved from the gallows spread through the dusty towns and isolated ranches, carried on the wind like dry leaves. Along with it came the persistent whispers about the O'Malley gang and their alleged involvement in the horse theft that had almost cost Eleanor her life. The O'Malleys were a ruthless family, known for their land-grabbing tactics and their violent enforcement of their own brand of justice. One afternoon, a rider from Harmony Gulch delivered a grim message. The O'Malleys were demanding the return of their stolen stallion and threatening to take it back by force if necessary. Elias read the message, his jaw tightening. He knew this was more than just a horse. It was a challenge to his authority, a test of his resolve. They wanted to intimidate him, to assert their dominance. Eleanor, overhearing the news, felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She had brought this trouble to Elias's doorstep. Elias, however, refused to be cowed. "This ranch is my land," he stated, his voice ringing with quiet defiance, "and those under my protection will not be threatened." He began to make preparations, fortifying the ranch, instructing his hands on defensive positions. Eleanor, though terrified, refused to be a burden. She insisted on helping, loading rifles, tending to supplies, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She saw the unwavering loyalty of Elias's ranch hands, their trust in his leadership, and it filled her with a new kind of admiration for him. The tension on the ranch was palpable, a low hum beneath the surface of daily life. Eleanor often found Elias watching her, a contemplative look in his eyes. He knew her past, her vulnerability, and yet he stood by her. She had given him her word, and he in turn was giving her his protection. The threat from the O'Malleys, while terrifying, had also solidified their bond, exposing the unwavering strength of Elias Thorne and revealing the quiet courage that lay dormant within Eleanor. The storm was brewing, and they would face it together. Are you on the edge of your seat? The conflict is building. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to make sure you don't miss the dramatic showdown. Days turned into a grueling wait, the air thick with anticipation. Elias and his men worked tirelessly, reinforcing fences, checking firearms and scouting the perimeter. The O'Malleys were known for their cunning and brutality, and Elias left nothing to chance. Eleanor, though confined mostly to the ranch house, felt every tremor of anxiety, every subtle shift in the atmosphere. She baked, cleaned and nursed a wounded ranch hand, her practical skills invaluable during these tense times. But her mind constantly drifted to the impending confrontation, the threat looming over their fragile sanctuary. One evening, a lone rider, one of Elias's most trusted scouts, galloped back to the ranch, his horse lathered and breathing heavily. "They're coming, Elias," he gasped, dismounting. "A dozen of 'em, maybe more. Riding hard, about a day out." A grim silence fell over the ranch. This was it. The confrontation was upon them. Elias gave his final orders, his voice calm and steady, belying the gravity of the situation. His men moved with quiet determination, each knowing the stakes. Eleanor found Elias in the main house, cleaning his rifle. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the lines of worry etched on his face. She approached him, her heart heavy. "Elias," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "This is my fault. They're coming because of me. He stopped cleaning, looked up, his green eyes piercing. "No, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm. "They're coming because they're bullies. They always look for weakness, for an excuse. You were simply a convenient one." He rose, placing a comforting, albeit brief, hand on her shoulder. "We will face them. Together." His words were a balm to her frayed nerves, a quiet promise of solidarity. That night, sleep was a distant luxury. Eleanor lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the creak of the wind, the occasional whinny of a horse. She thought of her vow, of the life she had narrowly escaped, and the life she was now fighting to protect. She realized with a startling clarity that this was no longer just Elias's battle. It was hers, too. The bond between them, forged in desperation, had deepened into something akin to loyalty, even affection. The dawn brought with it a chilling silence, broken only by the distant thud of hooves. The O'Malley gang appeared on the horizon, a menacing cloud of dust against the rising sun. They were a formidable sight, their faces hardened by years of lawlessness, their weapons glinting ominously. Elias and his men were positioned, rifles at the ready, behind makeshift barricades and within the sturdy walls of the ranch buildings. Eleanor watched from the main house, a loaded shotgun clutched in her trembling hands, her eyes fixed on Elias, a silent prayer on her lips. The O'Malleys, led by a brute named Silas O'Malley, rode closer, their yells echoing across the plains. "Thorne, hand over the woman and the horse, or this ranch is ours," Silas bellowed, his voice raw with menace. Elias stepped forward, unarmed, his figure a defiant silhouette. "This is my land, O'Malley," he called back, his voice clear and resonant. "And there's nothing here for you." The first shots rang out, shattering the morning stillness, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the shouts of men, and the thud of bullets against wood. Eleanor, despite her fear, found a surprising resolve. She aimed her shotgun, her hands steady now, and fired, the recoil jolting her shoulder. She saw one of the O'Malleys fall, and a grim satisfaction mixed with terror surged through her. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a fight for their home, for their lives. The battle raged. Elias fought with a quiet fury, his movements precise and deadly. His men, loyal and skilled, defended the ranch valiantly. Eleanor, reloading her shotgun, provided cover fire, her fear slowly morphing into a fierce protectiveness. She saw a moment where Silas O'Malley almost flanked Elias, and without thinking she screamed a warning. Elias turned, just in time, and the ranch hand beside her fired, incapacitating Silas. The tide of the battle began to turn. The O'Malleys, their leader wounded and their numbers dwindling, started to retreat, their curses fading into the dusty distance. The silence that followed the O'Malleys' retreat was deafening, broken only by the panting breaths of the ranch hands and the distant cries of wounded men. The ranch was scarred, bullet holes marring the wooden walls, but they had held. Elias, though bruised and weary, walked among his men, assessing injuries, offering quiet words of thanks. Eleanor rushed out to him, her heart soaring with relief and a profound sense of gratitude. She saw a gash on his arm, and without hesitation she began to tend to it, her touch gentle and sure. "We did it, Elias," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, his green eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and something else. Something softer, warmer. "We did, Eleanor," he replied, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. The conflict had brought them closer, forging a bond that went beyond the desperate vow she had made. They had faced death together, and in doing so, had found an unexpected partnership. The sheriff, arriving later with a small posse, found the O'Malleys rooted and Elias Thorne's ranch standing strong. He surveyed the scene, a newfound respect for Elias and for Eleanor clear in his gaze. The rumors of her past and the O'Malley's false accusations were finally laid to rest. Harmony Gulch would know the truth, and Elias Thorne would be revered not just for his land, but for his integrity and his courage. Life on the Thorne Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor and Elias, once strangers bound by a desperate vow, were now partners, their days filled with shared work, quiet conversations, and a growing unspoken affection. The rancher's wife had proven her worth, not just in domestic duties, but in her unwavering spirit and courage. Their marriage, born of desperation, was transforming into a genuine union, built on respect, resilience, and the shared understanding of a life lived under the vast, unpredictable sky of the American West. As the sun set, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, Eleanor stood beside Elias, looking out at their land. It was a new dawn, not just for the ranch, but for a life truly chosen, a home truly found. And that's the end of Eleanor's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, resilience, and unexpected love in the Old West, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Thank you for watching.